John air horn. I think he got the cover.
Who's got the air horn? No air horn.
Order! That man's getting your
That's pretty good. There, yeah, there's my air horn. Thank you.
Is your mic on?
Yeah. Is it? Is it on? It's not on?
It is on.
Is it?
It's on. You turn it up. No, listen. I gotta get
Hello? Okay, here we go. So the first thing that we're going to do this morning is we're going to take a look at 1 Timothy 5:8. And then after that, we're going to do some review. But 1 Timothy 5:8 says, "But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his own household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." So what do you think about that? I need feedback on that. What do you think that says? It's a convicting statement, isn't it? What else? Anybody got a suggestion?
I would say that there's a statement in this verse which later theologians refer to as the principle of subsidiarity, to throw out a big word. And it's the idea that decisions are made best at a local level, but also responsibilities subsist principally at the most local level. So whatever responsibility government has to take care of people, the family is first and primary. And then that also would be true for church. You know, it's easy
Exactly.
for someone to say, well, church take care of people. And the church does have a role in this, but the first and primary responsibility is for the family to take care of their own.
I couldn't have said it better myself. You've got more education than I do in this manner. So, it's a convicting statement, but what John said is very important. And more in our society today, one of the things that's taking place is, are we relying on government more and more to take care of the poor, to take care of those people that really need help? And yes, we are. And you have to remember that welfare in 100 years ago actually started in the church. And they took care of the people that really needed help. But another thing that it says as well, and I have to admit that I went into several commentaries, and it says, it doesn't say that you provide for relatives or people that should be providing for themselves. Family comes first, of course, in the line, but the church should be actually used for those with no family or they're unable to care for themselves. And Paul was really writing in Timothy a lot about family, and he was talking about widows that couldn't care for themselves as well. And even had good definitions of who they would consider a widow. It would be any lady that was over 60 years old. So if you're over 60 years old, that means that you should really be taken care of. Is there anybody in here that's over 60 years old? Yeah. Also, the other thing the verse says that came from the commentary is God created us to work so that we could provide for ourselves and those in the household. So that ethic, or that concept of working to take care of yourself. The other thing that Paul really looked at is he looked at the heathens around them that understood the natural duties of caring for their families, which If you look at, you'll see people in this instance that are really caring for their families that aren't Christians. So as Christians, we need to recognize that our faith isn't set aside those natural duties. It actually strengthens them. As Christians, we need to embrace that. So, how many people in this room have become the parent to your father or mother?
Me,
I'm sorry, Barbara.
not anymore, but yes.
Was she a pretty good parent?
Say that again.
Was she a pretty good parent
Not me.
to you?
I'm just saying, in the past.
Okay.
Have become like a parent.
It's more prevalent in our society today, and that's not an easy task when it takes place. And I'll give you an example. My mother lived right next door to us for several years. And as she aged, she would depend more and more upon us. But it got to the point where we had to have the son-mother talk rather than the mother-son talk, where we would sit down and say, Mom, there's some things that you really need to stop doing. And she would spend times in the emergency room because of things that she would do because she was disabled, and she would hurt herself. And so we actually got to the point that I thought about taking her yard rake away from her and not allowing her to do some of the things, because we would get a call, I can't get out of my chair, I can't do this, I can't do this. And so finally, she hurt herself so bad one day that she had to go into assisted care. And it was for rehab purposes, and she was only going to go there for a while. She was in the hospital because she'd hurt herself again. And I told her, Mom, you have to go to rehab. And her response was, you get the H out of my room, because I'm not going there. Now, stubbornly independent, very much so, but that's a prime example of what you may run into as you get older yourselves, or as you have to parent your parent. But then there's other examples of difficult parents as well. There are ones that have estranged themselves from the family, and what is our responsibility? To try and take care of them. But in many cases, boundaries have to be set. And I'll give you another prime example. I've seen a situation to where the parent was so obnoxious, so mean, that the individual had to walk in and say, Dad, I'm going to help you, but if you do this, this, and this, I have to draw away, because my family will not allow me to go through the torture that you're putting me through. And these are really, really tough decisions to make. The other example of that is what we run into sometimes with what we call elder abuse. And if you are aware of elder abuse, and that is where a child or a relative is taking advantage of a person that can't take care of themselves anymore, financially and or physically, you have a duty to report that. And that's something that's critical in this day and age, because it takes place a lot. And I've been involved in a couple of situations that I actually had to say something to other family members and to get this problem taken care of. So elder abuse is prevalent, and if you know of it, do something about it. So those are life applications. Now, the next thing I want to do, and I insist on this, is I want to know what the most important thing was that you learned 2 weeks ago when I was here.
No matter how little you have an estate that you need to take care of.
Okay, very good. Yes, Carol?
Our kids need wills. Right now.
Yes, they do.
They have to, yeah.
So what would be an important thing of why your kids need wills?
Because they own property and they have children, and again, those things are all at risk if they don't have anything laid out on how they want that to go. You know, if something happens to them, who raises the kids? Who handles their property? Who handles their estate?
Who handles the money from their estate that their kids are not capable of handling? What else did you learn 2 weeks ago?
Durable power of attorney.
Very good, Steve. I can't stress the importance of what's called a DPA. And in a moment, as we go into the trust part of my talk, you really need to consider a DPA plus the trust, and I'll give you more information on that. Pardon? Okay. Very good. Anything else anything that the younger people learned last week? Okay. All right. So why would you want to trust, more specifically, a living trust that is revocable? And what is it? So let's talk first about the word revocable. And revocable is an important aspect of this, because if a trust is revocable, that means in this particular case, you are still in control of your assets. If it has the term irrevocable, that means you're no longer in charge of your assets. And there are a few revocable trusts around. And basically what happens is, it's like giving this pen away. If I gave this pen to Ray, and I was in an irrevocable trust, I could go back and get that pen from Ray and say, hey, I want that back. But if it's revocable, I can't get it back. Irrevocable, I can't get it back. And you see irrevocable trust in estate planning for people that have handicaps, and there's a lot of different positions in this instance where an irrevocable trust makes sense. And a lot of times an irrevocable trust will come into play at the second to die scenario. So let's talk about the trust a little bit. And I would suspect that there's probably several people in the room that have trust. Make sure that you take a look and see that word irrevocable's in there. So the trust, the living trust, is created while you're alive, and you're typically your own trustee, but there should also be a successor trustee named in your trust. And sometimes people will even go out and hire a trust organization to handle their revocable trust. Assets pass by beneficiary designations, and the big important thing is probate is not involved unless certain things happen. That avoiding probate, hopefully last week or the 2 weeks ago, we talked about that a little bit. If you do have a will, the big thing that people continually say is, oh, you got to go through probate, you got to go through probate. And hopefully what I conveyed to you a couple of weeks ago, even if you have a will, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go through probate if it's managed properly. And probate can be a bad thing. It can cause you to have to go to court. It causes all sorts of problems if you have to set up conservatorships. But a thing that I want you to understand is a will is a good tool and a trust is a good tool as long as they're managed by you and you make sure that they're updated. So they're also arranged so you can manage your affairs in the event of physical, mental disability if funded, and if you've named a competent alternate trustee. So if you're not going to be the trustee of your own will, who's going to be the second person that you're going to name?
Be somebody you trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What did Jenny say?
Somebody you trust.
Because if you don't have someone that you can really feel confident in, then you better get legal funds to go with.
Typically, it goes to your spouse, and then after your spouse, you should name somebody as well. And that's a family member. And as people age, changing that trustee becomes critically important, because you may not be able to manage your trust because you do not have the wherewithal to do that. And if you actually go out and hire a trust organization, they're typically going to charge you 1 to 3% of what the total estate is worth to manage your trust. But very frequently, in my opinion, that is a great way to go. All right. Its ease and simplicity of changing its provisions, you can do that at any time. So let's say that Don comes to me and says, hey, we need to disinherit our youngest son. I don't like him anymore. Well, you can do that. And he might object to that. But remember when we talked about a will being contested? A trust in this instance protects against that better than a will does. You can stay out of court. And we're not going to disinherit our youngest son. And if you have a lot of deeded or titled property, a trust makes sense. The other thing that's critically important is if you own a business or several businesses, it makes sense. So, you can think about those things. One of the other things that I look at, if you own property in different states, it makes sense. And so towards that end, just know that they're complex. If you see an attorney will sit and talk to you about which one you would actually need. And I really recommend that you go through a process of saying, which would be most appropriate for me? And that's something that's important. The other thing that's critical here is this. As you sit to get a trust, the attorney should recommend to you, you need to have a will with the trust. And why?
Anything you didn't put in the trust?
As time goes by, what happens? People forget, they buy cars, they do different things, and what they don't have inside their trust actually is now going to go through probate through their will. So your scenario is, if you do get a trust, make sure that you have that portion of it covered as well. Also get a durable power of attorney with it. So you'll see that the reason why trust costs a lot more than a will does is the fact that you're now buying the trust, the will, you're getting a durable power of attorney with it. They should also have you do what's called, again, we talked about last time, an advance directive, just to cover your bases. And a good attorney in this instance will recommend all those things to you as you go through the planning process. So constantly review that. So, why wouldn't you want to have a trust? Well, I just talked about one of them that's expensive, isn't it? It's expensive, and many times what you will do in this instance is when you sit down with somebody, they'll say, well, my cost to just draw up a simple will for you is going to be between $350. Now that, if you're a married couple, that's $350 a piece, so you're looking at $700 to draw up a will. Now if you want to trust, the cost will go someplace in the neighborhood of $2,000, but on top of that, you're going to have the wills and you're going to have the DPA within that. So they are more expensive. It doesn't protect you against creditors. Have you ever looked in the paper and saw those notices where somebody has passed away and it's in the paper saying that these people have passed away. If you're a creditor, you have this amount of time to claim what is yours. And you'll see those all the time. Well, if you have a will, in this instance, they have to collect their monies with 120 days. With a trust, what happens in this instance is that stays open indefinitely. So somebody can come back and look for that money, in this instance, that you've actually tried to hide from them. And that's their whole purpose in this instance, is looking for money that people have tried to hide from them. So it's also a accountable resource for Medicaid. And we're going to get into long-term care today and talk about that here in a few minutes. But Medicaid is a provision in this case that's offered to people that have severe disabilities, or people in this instance that are older and have no Social Security benefits. Medicaid comes about for them. And it's, what it is it's insurance for the poor. And basically, unless you have, at this point in time, and I can't think of the figure off the top of my head, less than about $4,000 in assets, you do not qualify for Medicaid. Not all assets are easily transferred, and one of the problems that you'll find many times is that cars, you may have problems in this instance getting them insured after you've put them in a trust. I've personally never seen it, but I know of people that have. So, but holding a car in trust, let's say you got 15 cars, and let's say that you have problems getting titles for them. It may be hard in this instance to put those cars inside of a trust. So there's no mechanism in it to save on taxes. With both a will and a revocable living trust, there's nothing in there that's going to say, hey, you still may have to pay estate taxes. It just depends on your size of estate, and you may still have to do that. You have the expense of administration after you establish it. And the other aspect of it, business assets, if you are in a business, have to flow into it. And the other aspect of it too that is a detriment is trusts do not like qualified monies. And what I mean by qualified monies that you hold in an IRA, a 401k, or a defined benefit plan. Those are monies in this instance that you're going to have to pay tax on, and they don't like those. So for the most part, those monies pass according to beneficiary. And you should really make sure that you have your beneficiaries drilled down right so that it goes to the right people. As I said last week, do not make minors beneficiaries of IRAs or life insurance, because the state has ramifications of what will take place if you do that. It has to be held in conservatorship. So, again, who should have one? Business owners. And if you own a business and you have a partner in business, one of the things that is critical if you own a trust is that you have what's called a buy-sell arrangement. And this is going a little bit further now into this, but it's important to understand this. If you're in a business with somebody and you own 50% of that and your business partner passes away and there's not an agreement between the two of you that you will buy their portion if they pass away, then you've just become partners with their family. And sometimes family members aren't good partners. So really in this instance, what we call a buy-sell agreement, there's several types, but it's a written document drawn up by an attorney, and then you can have what's called an unfunded buy-sell agreement. And what I mean by that is, hey, I've got an agreement that says I'll buy from you, but where are we going to get the money to do that? Well, for most part, you can go to the bank and borrow it But the other really smart thing to do is to own life insurance on one another. So if your partner passes away, the funds are there to buy your share of the business. It goes immediate to the family, and they're out of the business with you. So it's a critical thing, and we see many businesses go under in this instance because they don't have that buy-sell agreement. If you're a sole proprietor, you can set one up as well. And that's by finding somebody in this instance that says, hey, I'd like to buy your business in the event that you pass away. It could be an employee. It could be somebody in this instance that you've known for a long time. However, just remember, it's really important to have a agreement, a buy-sell agreement. If you don't have one, get one as soon as you can. So if you own a business, again, but here's the other one. If you have large families create dynamics, don't they? And you may have adult children in this instance that can't handle money well. And so that trust will give you a basis there. And it's really something that I think is really important in this instance for the large family. So I asked permission to use a member of this church as an example, and Bill Porfili gave me that permission. I wish that he was here this morning. Bill came to me years ago with a trust on his parents. His father had passed away, and they still owned quite a few assets. They had a house in Canyon City that she was still living in, but she was fast becoming disabled and could no longer care for the property or make her own decisions. Brought his trust in, and we started dealing with the things that needed to be dealt with. And over a period of about 1.5 to 2 years, we gradually looked at the provisions of the trust and just followed what the trust said. His mother eventually went into a long-term care facility, and we'd set the funds in a bank account where he could draw each month to supplement her Social Security and other benefits to offset that cost. And after about 1.5 years, she passed away, and Bill and his brother came into my office, and I had a copy of their trust, and we had been reading that and going through that together. And we sat down, and they'd brought their copies, and they said, well, what do we do now? And the trust was set up so that, I said, well, both of you are named as the beneficiaries, and you have the checkbook. You need to write a check for 50% of the benefits for each other, close out the checking account, and you're finished. So that's an example of how easy it could be. But it was not a complex trust. It was a very simple trust, and all the things had been taken care of it, because as soon as their mother went into the care facility, we started to deal with these things one at a time just to get it taken care of. And so the reason why I'm saying this to you, a will or a trust is not going to take care of all the problems without your input. You need to be involved. You need to look at it. You need to review it. You have to look at what it says. You make sure that if you have somebody that's a beneficiary that's passed away, they need to be taken out of it. And there's all sorts of things that need to be done in a trust. So what I'm saying to you is there's a need, in my opinion, for you to look at your trust and or your will every 3 or 4 years, just to review what's in it. And you can do that personally. And I will say to you, Don and I are guilty. We haven't done that for a long time. We need to take a look at ours and say, hey, this is what we stated back 10 years ago. Is it still what we want to take place? Any questions about trust? No questions, Judy?
Yeah, I don't know what to ask.
All right. Let's talk about another another thing that I used to run in frequently when I was doing the financial planning. Long-term care. Who will need it? And that's a big question. Who will need it? Well, statistics tell us that there's about a 45% chance that if you're married, that one of you will spend time in a care facility. So that means 4.5 people out of 10. Have you ever gone into a long-term care facility? Who are the most prevalent people in that facility? They're women. 3 out of 4 men die before their wives. And so it's largely women that are in care facilities. And it's a 45% chance that at least one of them is going to be there. But that means there's a 55% chance that they won't. And that's an important thing to think about as well. Because as we age, we do get to that point in time where there's disabilities that create problems for us. And in that 55%, there's other alternatives, but the other alternatives are sometimes extremely hard on families. So how many people in here have taken care of an elderly parent in their home? Not fun. Yet you're called to do it, aren't you? But it gets to the point in this instance that at some point in time, you have to recognize the fact that they'll be better taken care of if they're in a facility. And that's a hard thing to admit for many people. And if you've experienced that, the guilt, if you've experienced that, don't do that to yourself. I've had at least 3 clients who are taking care of their spouses that have died before their spouses because of the stress in their lives. It's very hard work, and it's not good for either party, for the person that's a caregiver or the person in this instance that is taking care of them. So the out-of-pocket costs, though, for long-term care ranges between $60,000 and $100,000. Assisted living is slightly less than that, but it's still very expensive. And people, you've heard of the problem that, well, dad has to go into a care facility and that's going to bankrupt mom. That's not a true statement. Virtually in this instance, if a person has to go into a care facility, there is a spin-down aspect that the married couple and the one that is not institutionalized can retain $120,000, and that's indexed for inflation, plus a car and a house. So it's not going to bankrupt them. And so everybody, there used to be a lot of long-term care seminars that went around, and they would really work on that position. Hey, you're going to be bankrupt, you're going to be bankrupt. Here's another scenario that you need to be aware of, and it's what we call the clawback provision. So let's say dad has now passed away, mom's in the care facility, and all of a sudden the kids start to see the drain, in this instance, on her bank account. And it's going down by $3,000 or $4,000 a month. And they go and say, oh, we need to sell our house so we can get our money. We need to take that money out of the bank and put it in our names. Well, if you do that, basically what happens then is the state will come back in and they'll come back after that money. In fact, if the person in the facility has qualified for Medicaid, they'll stop Medicaid, and until you've paid back all of that money, then they'll not be eligible for it. So just know that, and that's something that's critical. Don's father, when he was in a care facility, we actually went through about $120,000. We spent that money down, and it was in about 4 years that we spent that $120,000 down. When he died, there was still $4,000 left in his checking account. The state of Idaho called Don and said, send us the $4,000, because he hadn't made it through 5 years. So if you can pay yourself for 5 years, then you become Medicaid eligible. The other thing to understand too is this. If you have somebody that actually needs to go into a facility and they're going to qualify for Medicaid immediately, there has to be Medicaid beds available in that facility. And so people get around that by saying, well, we'll pay the initial cost, the first initial cost of 3 or 4 months. Sometimes the facility will say 6 months, and then let's go on Medicaid, and they will allow them to do that. So remember, you've got to pay yourself. So how do you take care of those long-term care costs? Well, many people in this instance have reverted to what's called a reverse mortgage. I don't like those. Most financial planners don't like those because you give up a lot of control. But it may be the only alternative. And if it is the only alternative, there's nothing wrong with that, because that keeps part of the house available to heirs. And actually, you can go back and pay back all the reverse mortgage costs and take the house over totally if you want to do that yourself. So reverse mortgage is one of the ways. Now remember when I said that there's a 45% chance that one of the married couple will be in a care facility. That's a 55% chance that you won't. So you can buy a long-term care policy, and I have one, and you can pay for that for years and years, and these first started showing up in the late 80s, early 90s. Insurance companies didn't know how to price them. And so what took place in this instance is many companies got into the industry, they didn't know how to price them, but they have the right to increase the price on those policies. And some of them have gone up as much as 300%. So to give you an example, you bought a benefit and it's going to give you so much money per day for so many years, and what took place is that it cost you $100 a month when you first bought it. Now it's costing you $400 a month. What happens? People drop them because they can't afford them. Now there are several good companies out there that still sell those, and if you have a financial advisor, I would certainly recommend that you talk to them about it. The other thing that's really become prevalent recently is life insurance policies that actually prepay a death benefit. And what happens is many life insurance policies now have a rider on it that says that if you're disabled and you're in a facility, after a period of 6 months, we'll start to prepay the death benefit. And they'll prepay up to 90% of the death benefit in many cases. Most of them range between 80 and 85%. So that is an alternative in this instance to buying long-term care. And typically when you buy that life insurance, you have to specify you want that benefit on there. Now, the example that I use for people is, what are the odds that you will, in this instance, use your life insurance? 100%. Everybody, one death per person per lifetime. And so the life insurance alternative, in my opinion, is a much better alternative than just a straight long-term care policy. I was fortunate enough to get one. Don and I bought ours back in when I was like 52 or 53 years old. And our combined cost for a very good benefit is like, I think, $130 a month. And you'd be hard-pressed to find that now. And it's only increased once in the last 20 years since we bought that. So the life insurance scenario does bring about, in this instance, an estate tax problem in the state of Oregon, but we'll get into that in a moment. Any questions about that? Does anybody in here own a long-term care policy? Okay. Yes.
You suggest somebody gets one of those.
Well, typically they won't sell you one until you're 40,
Okay.
all right? You probably got a few years.
Yeah, I'm 46.
Yes.
I have a question. My name is Ken. I'm from Washington. I'm a truck driver, and I'm very happy to be here this morning.
Thank you.
So, according to the verse that you was teaching on this morning, 1 Timothy 5, verse 8, he said, "But those who won't care for their relatives, especially those in their own household, have denied the true faith. Such people are worse than unbelievers." So, according to that verse, is it us as children that need to take care of our parents when they can take care of themselves? Or should we leave that job to whether the government or a care facility, according to that verse?
Okay, good question. Yes, as children, you should take care of your parents. But there will be a point when you're no longer able to. All right? Because let's take my wife, and I'm in bad shape, and she's trying to take care of me. She can't lift me. She's going to have trouble getting me to stand up in the shower to take a shower. She has to make sure my medication is done right, et cetera, et cetera. And she's 3 years younger than I am, but there'll be a point in time when she can no longer do it. And she will recognize that because she cared for her mother who had Alzheimer's disease. She helped care for my mother, who was very stubborn and independent. And it just got to the point that she could no longer do it physically. All right? So, yes, you need to take care of your parents. And taking care of them is realizing that they're going to be provided better care in a long-term care facility than what I can give them. And quite frankly, what happens in most instances, when a person goes into a care facility, for a while they get better. They get better because they are getting that better care. But I understand where you're coming from because you feel this commitment to your family that you need to do as much as you can to take care of it. Just realize there will be a point in time when you can't do that. Now, to take care of them spiritually, yes, you can do that till the end of their life. And that's one of the things that verse is talking about.
But there are also the boundaries that we had to come into play with one of our parents who was very mean. And you have to set down some boundaries. And you have to say to them, and it's really hard when you're the kid, telling the parent, that behavior's not going to work. And if you want me to help you, you cannot do that bad behavior back to me. That will not work. And if you choose to continue, then you're on your own. It's amazing how quickly they turn around and try and do a little better when you're darn serious, without being mean yourself.
You know, but some of this too is going to look different depending on the culture you're a part of. You know, in the United States, it's a fairly recent innovation if you think about our history, but you know, we are living in small nuclear family structures where the two parents, the elderly parents, are living in Hermiston, Oregon, and the kids are in Virginia.
Exactly.
You know, in previous generations and in much of the rest of the world, it's all multi-generational and they're all living together. And so there's a support structure there that is different, which would how you apply this might look different in some of those other cultures.
The care facility in the last century until about the 1950s, for the most part, was a family home, simply because of what John's talking about.
Yeah, sorry, I don't wanna hold everything, but I'm from Haiti.
From Haiti?
Yes. So, like, it's a shame if our parents can take care of themselves. It's a shame to let somebody else take care of them. You know, because we are very close, and basically our mentality is like our parents invest themselves in us, and we give that in return when they can't take care of themselves. So it's new to me to see how the thing goes here with independence. Sometimes the parents want they don't want to be a burden for the kids. You know, they want to go to the facility. But as what I said, it's the cultural differences.
It is.
It's really important.
Right, so we talk after church, I'll tell you what I'm gonna do with my in-laws in a few minutes. But by the way, she's sitting right here. I think at some level it's my responsibility, but there's also, there can be a team approach to this. And in our situation, sometimes that team approach might involve, facilities and resources beyond this.
I think in America, we have been kind of cushioned from a lot of what much of the world, I mean, we're healthier, we have good health care. We kind of expect to live forever and to retire strong and healthy. I think in much of the world, you wouldn't send grandma to a facility, and if grandma stops eating, she dies, 9 months sooner than grandma in the U.S. that goes and gets a feeding tube. You can't manage 24 hours. So I think there's kind of a little bit different expectations of defined care. If grandma can't stand in the shower, grandma doesn't get a shower, and
Right.
so, and yeah, I think that cultural is a lot of it. Just what do we expect? I think we expect in America to live longer, be healthier than a lot of the world just accepts that when I can't eat anymore, I don't get food. So,
Yes.
We had a situation, I'm the youngest of 5, and my oldest sister who has rheumatoid arthritis and osteoporosis really bad. She fell and she broke her back. And she had to go to care, she's like, well, I'll go to the hospital and then I'll go home. It's like, no, actually, you'll go to a care facility for rehabilitation and you'll be there for months. And for us, we're like, holy smokes, that could happen to us. When she went home, my parents were still really in good health, and mom and dad took care of her for months until she was able to, again, resume care. They did a plan where they didn't want to be burdens. I totally hear. We don't want to be burdens on our kids. Goodness, no. And they went to assisted living. Then they had some health problems. Mom ended up in rehab. Dad falls, breaks the vertebrae. They ended up in adult foster care, and because they did need some skilled care. But then that adult foster care was so cool that they would have family dinners because they said your parents they just want to see you kids. They don't want to be a burden to you, but they want to gather for a meal. And mom and dad were their best days on those days. And yet we weren't skilled enough to take care of what they needed. And mom had Alzheimer's and needed a high level of care. But as kids, we felt, we went and we saw them every time we were in town and communicated with them on the phone. But we knew they were being really well cared for, and they felt good about it too. So all kinds of things happen.
Yeah. Yes.
So Kelly, I've dealt with this as a younger child. My grandfather had cancer. When he was in the hospital and I told him that, he said, I will not stay here, I will go home.
Right.
He had an in-house doctor that came to come see him. When he passed, my grandmother no longer had that in-home doctor. So when she got Alzheimer's and dementia, my uncle put her in a facility, and she actually did really well in that facility. And she passed away at 76, and she got in there at 65, so.
Yes.
The verse in Timothy, it is by the apostle, the inspired apostle, laid upon us as children. And you need to abide under that principle. We are to love our parents, honor our parents, all the days of their lives. Paul also writes in Corinthians that the parents are to lay up for their children. I believe what will be taught here is to be wise stewards, even in the future, of how we direct our assets, our lives, our mental makeup, every gift we have, from ourselves to what God has given us. And it's in love that we're doing this. And hopefully our children see that. Now, my hope would be that when the time does come, my children would say, man, Dad, thanks for preparing this for us. Thanks for the long-term insurance or the long-term care facility policy. You know what? We want to wash your feet. I want you in my home. I want to love you like you love me. And see, that's their decision. I'm not taking that decision out. But I'm loving them in this class, learning all that I can, as Paul puts on me, to lay up for my children and to give them a legacy. And so we have to look at the scripture, who's it speaking to? As a son, I have to say, God, how do I live this out? How do I care for my mom? How do I care for my mother-in-law? How do I love my parents? Regardless of culture, the truth it lays on me a duty. Right? And so I need to seek and pray through that process. And we had to with Carrie's mom, who just passed away. Very difficult, but we learned by God's grace to love her. We didn't have to put her in a care facility. And we're thankful. But the main burden was for how we love her in her old age, and her crankiness, and all the physical issues, and God just met our needs. So.
Thank you. Very good point.
And just to add to that, I know sometimes that means, how can I care for you and keep you in your home? You know, because I know that's where, because I tried moving her at one time, and it lasted 2 weeks. So she wanted me back. So, you know, how do I care for you? How can I set up care for you so that you can be in your home? You know, because that's where you want. I think that's where you're going to be happy. Because I know taking her out of her home is going to.
Home health care is an option. Our problem locally is we don't have many home health care people. They're very difficult to find. And you talk about elder abuse, it occurs there because they'll steal from you. It's just not a very good option for us here in this area. We don't have enough population. I wish that we did. Okay, we didn't get as far as we needed to today, but that means we're going to have to meet longer in this class. Judy?
So I was just going to say, my mom had long-term care. And really, because it is, to me, a very positive thing to have.
Right.
But if you have that, we had to fight to get with the company that she was with, to get something. And they were supposed to, even, my mom said, that she was staying in our house for over a year after COVID. And we had her own little house right across the driveway, just for her to stay in. And Mom said, we have to call on this because they could pay, these things. And I said, oh, Mom, we didn't take advantage of that. And But that was okay, I mean, it was okay. But then when we got to the point where we had to put her in a facility, my brothers live in one place, my sister lives further away, we would live here, so you make sure, if you're close, that you can see them as often as possible. My sister was the one that wrote cards, and those meant so much to my mom because she could read them over and over and over. So if you can't be close, send a card once a week, or every other week, something, to encourage them and let them know you care.
The quality of care that your loved one would receive in a facility is directly related to the amount of time you spend with them in that facility. And that's something that's very, very important.
One thing too, I found, if you can't go, there was a lady in there that her room was a couple of doors down from Mom's. And if you can't go, if you can go, they know you're coming, the staff knows you're coming sooner or later. And so I think the parent gets a little better care than if you're left alone.
Yeah.
If you're left alone in there, I think that they can, I heard some rough conversations going on a couple times.
Yep, you can. Mike, would you close us in prayer?